Hey there, dreamers. Welcome back to our channel. Before we drift into tonight's gentle story from the world of Phineas and Ferb, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide our sleepy little community reaches. All right, without further ado, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. The world was quiet that morning, wrapped in the soft blue of dawn. Somewhere in the suburbs of Danville, the first birds began their gentle chorus, their songs drifting lazily over rooftops and freshly watered lawns. Inside a familiar backyard, the one with its wooden treehouse and half-built inventions scattered about, a small platypus stirred awake. His name, as always, was Perry. He wasn't an agent here. There was no secret entrance beneath the house, no hidden lair humming below. He was simply a pet, and in this gentle version of the world, that was all he'd ever been. Perry blinked slowly, his eyelids heavy with sleep. The light coming through the window was warm and kind, painting soft patterns across the floorboards. He stretched his small limbs, tail pressing against the rug, and gave a faint little yawn, that quiet sound that only creatures make when they have no rush, no schedule, no secret mission to attend. Outside, the world waited in stillness. Phineas and Ferb were already awake, of course. They always were. Their muffled voices drifted in from the backyard, those light, enthusiastic tones that carried the weight of endless summer plans. "Ferb, I know what we're going to do today," came the cheerful call, followed by the sound of wood creaking and the faint hammering of nails. Perry turned his head slightly toward the sound. He recognized it, but this time there was no need to slip away unnoticed. No trapdoors or sudden flashes of alertness in his eyes. He simply listened. He sat for a long moment by the window, tail resting lazily beside him, watching the golden morning spill across the grass. The air shimmered faintly, like memories caught in sunlight. There was a time in another life when this exact moment would have triggered something deep within him, a coded call, a flash of duty, the faint vibration of a communicator hidden beneath the floor. But here, the only vibration came from the hum of summer cicadas waking up among the trees. He blinked again. The calmness was unusual, but not unwelcome. Perry padded out to the porch. The wooden planks were warm beneath his little webbed feet. Phineas waved at him, mid-sentence, a quick, cheerful, "Hey, Perry," before turning back to his latest blueprint, something about a backyard concert stage, though no one was entirely sure what it would become by afternoon. Ferb gave a quiet nod, his focused green eyes following a line of pencil marks that curved into something mysterious and brilliant. Perry watched them both for a while, his expression unreadable but peaceful. It was strange, in a gentle way, how he'd grown used to this life. He didn't miss danger or secret codes, not consciously. Instead, he found a soft rhythm to his days, the same breakfast dish at the same spot near the window, the same nap under the tree where dappled light fell like liquid gold. Sometimes, when Phineas and Ferb talked about making the most of summer, Perry wondered if he too was making the most of something, though he couldn't name what. Perhaps contentment. Perhaps quiet purpose. A breeze carried through the yard, bringing the scent of grass, the sweetness of early flowers, and the soft hum of the day just beginning. Somewhere, a lawnmower started up in the distance, then faded away again. Perry tilted his head slightly upward, as if he could sense something beyond the horizon. A spark of instinct stirred inside him, faint as the memory of a dream. But when he blinked, it was gone. As the morning unfolded, the backyard filled with the gentle clutter of creation. Wooden boards leaned against fences. Jars of bolts and brushes glimmered in the sun. Phineas hummed a tune as he worked. Ferb moved with patient precision, and Perry quiet and watchful, sat nearby beneath the shade of the treehouse. Every so often, Phineas would wander over to pat his head or tell him about the day's project. Perry would blink in response, tail swishing faintly against the grass. "What you think, Perry?" Phineas would ask brightly. And Perry, in his silence, somehow managed to answer with the smallest tilt of his head, a look that meant, "Everything's fine as it is." The wind stirred again. It carried the faint chime of the wind bell hanging from the porch, its soft, metallic notes blending into the rhythm of hammer taps and laughter. Perry's gaze followed a drifting feather as it spiraled gently to the ground. He watched it land near his feet, then slowly placed his paw over it, not to keep it, but as if to feel its stillness. There was peace in the ordinariness of it all. Peace in knowing he didn't have to be anything more than what he was. Later, when noonlight grew soft and sleepy, Perry dozed in the shade. His breathing was slow, rhythmic. The sounds of the boys' voices blurred into the soft hum of the summer air. In that space between waking and dreaming, Perry's mind painted vague shapes, shadows of something he'd never lived. He saw flashes of movement, a hat, a gloved hand, a leap across rooftops. The images were faint and soundless, fading like dust motes in sunlight. He stirred slightly, a flick of his tail, but didn't wake fully. And somewhere deep inside that still mind, a quiet question began to form, one that didn't feel like his own. What if you were meant for something more? But the breeze shifted. The sunlight warmed his back, and the thought dissolved into nothing. When he finally opened his eyes again, Phineas and Ferb were painting their latest invention, laughing at each other's brushstrokes. Perry blinked at them, slow and serene. He didn't know what the dream had been. He only knew the feeling it left behind, a soft ache, both sad and calm. He stretched once more, curled up tighter, and drifted back into sleep. The afternoon drifted slowly, like a soft melody without hurry or destination. Clouds passed gently overhead, casting moving shadows across the grass. The backyard shimmered in that hazy golden glow unique to midsummer, bright, yet somehow tender. Perry awoke to the sound of a faint crash, followed by Phineas's cheerful laugh echoing through the yard. "Guess that wasn't supposed to happen," Phineas chuckled. Ferb, as usual, said nothing, only adjusted a few bolts and quietly righted a fallen plank. Perry blinked his sleep away, stretching in the shade. His gaze followed them, watching the easy rhythm of their teamwork. Every sound was familiar now, the laughter, the scraping of wood, the faint tick of an old radio from the kitchen window. Yet beneath the calm, something stirred. It wasn't a memory exactly, more like a reflex, a quiet instinct that hummed beneath his thoughts. As Phineas climbed the half-built frame of their new contraption, Perry felt a subtle tightening in his chest, a faint readiness, like a ripple through still water. He didn't understand why, but he stood and took a few slow steps toward them, tail brushing the ground. Then it happened. A board shifted under Phineas's foot, wobbling for just a second too long. Before anyone could react, Perry was already moving. He leapt forward, steady and precise, pushing his small body against the base of the plank. The motion was effortless, practiced, almost trained. The board stabilized, and Phineas regained his balance, laughing again as though nothing serious had occurred. "Whoa, nice timing, Perry. You really saved the day there," he said with a grin. Perry just blinked, unbothered, tail flicking in quiet rhythm. But deep within, the faint hum lingered. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't surprise. It was recognition. A shadow of something old and familiar, something his mind didn't remember, but his body never forgot. Later that day, while Phineas and Ferb painted the final touches on their summer stage, Perry wandered off toward the far end of the yard. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and warm paint. Fireflies were already beginning to stir in the shaded corners near the fence, tiny flickers of gold against the growing dusk. Perry paused by the garden, watching a line of ants trace their careful path through the dirt. He admired their quiet order, how each knew where to go, how to move, how to build. He wondered, in that wordless animal way, whether he had once belonged to a similar rhythm. He turned his head, scanning the yard with slow, deliberate curiosity. A faint breeze tugged at his fur. There. A sudden rustle behind the fence, too sharp to be the wind. In that instant, the calm broke like ripples on still water. Perry's posture shifted. His body lowered instinctively. His eyes narrowed, and not in fear, but in focus. For a heartbeat, he felt something powerful surge through him, something precise and disciplined. But then a cat wandered out from behind the fence, tail flicking lazily, eyes half closed in disinterest. Perry froze mid-crouch, blinked once, then twice. The energy faded as quickly as it came. He straightened up, gave a quiet snort of amusement, if platypuses could ever be said to snort, and resumed his calm walk. Still that spark inside him lingered. Some small, sleeping part of himself had stirred, then settled again. Evening approached, slow and golden. The world softened around its edges. Phineas and Ferb's stage stood complete, glowing faintly with the first glimmers of string lights that Ferb had hung carefully across the beams. It wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. The boys' laughter filled the yard, echoing softly through the warm air. "Tomorrow we'll build the instruments," Phineas said, admiring their work. "It's going to be great, Ferb." Ferb nodded, content in his quiet way. Perry sat a few feet away, watching the light shimmer above them. The reflections danced in his eyes like small memories of something far away. Every flicker seemed to call to him, whispering in a language he couldn't quite remember. He tilted his head slightly, the way one does when half recognizing a sound. And for just a second the world blurred around him. He saw, or thought he saw, flashes of another place. Walls lined with glowing screens, a secret door sliding open, a fedora hanging on a hook. He blinked, and it was gone. The lights returned to normal, the laughter resumed, and the hum of the night crept in around them. By the time dinner was ready, the sky had faded into deep violet. Stars began to prick through the darkness like shy embers. Perry sat on the porch, a small bowl beside him, the sounds of clinking dishes drifting faintly from inside the house. The windows glowed a warm orange, and for a moment the scene felt eternal, like the kind of evening that repeats forever in memory. He gazed out at the quiet world beyond the fence, the moon rising slow and silver. Somewhere, deep in that silver light, he thought he saw a shadow move across a distant rooftop, something sleek and purposeful. But when he blinked again, the rooftop was empty. He lowered his gaze, calm once more. Whatever that was, a trick of the light, a dream, or something stranger, it didn't matter. The night was peaceful, and peace was its own kind of mystery. He settled himself under the porch lamp, curling up in a soft pool of light. Fireflies blinked nearby, matching the rhythm of his slow breathing. And as the gentle hum of the night deepened, Perry dreamed again, not of action or danger, but of stillness, and of the quiet wonder of being part of a world that didn't need saving. Night came gently, like the turning of a page. The sky over Danville deepened into a velvet blue, and the stars stretched across it like memories written in light. Inside the small house at the end of Maple Drive, every window glowed with warmth. Candace was upstairs on her phone, her voice bouncing between laughter and complaint. Phineas and Ferb were in their room, sketching out another idea for tomorrow. And in the quietest corner of it all, Perry slept soundly on his small cushion, his steady breathing blending with the hum of the evening. Everything was peaceful. And yet, something small, something unspoken, began to stir. It started in his dreams. He was standing on a rooftop that shimmered in moonlight. The wind brushed through his fur, gentle but cool, carrying the scent of rain and steel. Below him, the city glowed like a circuit board, alive with flickering lights and distant sounds. He didn't know why he was there, but every part of him felt like he belonged. In the dream, he moved differently, with purpose, grace, certainty. His body knew the motions before his mind caught up. He leapt effortlessly between rooftops, as if drawn by some invisible rhythm. The sound of the wind rushing past his ears wasn't frightening. It was familiar, soothing. He landed without a sound on a tall ledge, gazing out over the city as the clouds parted to reveal the moon. Then faintly he heard a voice, not clear but warm, a strange blend of humor and mischief. "Well, well, Perry, the word never came. The wind carried it away before it could finish. Perry blinked. The dream flickered like an old film reel unraveling. The skyline blurred into watercolor. The lights dimmed. The rooftops melted into the dark. And then, as easily as it had appeared, the world vanished. He awoke in silence. The morning light seeped softly through the blinds, painting the walls with pale gold. Perry's eyes opened slowly. For a moment he lay perfectly still, as if waiting for the dream to return. It didn't. He sat up, blinking toward the window. Outside, the day had already begun. Phineas's voice carried faintly through the air, bright and certain as always. "Ferb, I know what we're going to do today." Perry tilted his head, listening. His body still felt different, as if part of him had woken earlier than the rest. There was a strange ache in his chest, a whisper that told him the dream hadn't been just a dream. But he didn't know what to do with that feeling, so he simply let it settle, quiet and unbothered, beneath his calm surface. He walked to the kitchen, where Linda was humming to herself while watering the plants. She smiled down at him. "Morning, Perry. You sleep okay, sweetie?" Perry blinked and gave his usual soft chirp. She chuckled, reaching down to pat his head. "You're such a good boy." He liked that sound. Good boy. It made the day feel real again. Outside, the backyard shimmered with dew. The sun caught on every blade of grass, turning the world into 1,000 tiny mirrors. Phineas and Ferb were already knee-deep in some new experiment involving mirrors and sound waves. Perry watched them for a while, sitting in his usual spot beneath the treehouse. But he wasn't fully present. His eyes followed the sky more often than the boys. Every so often, he would glance toward the horizon, toward the faint outline of Danville's cityscape in the distance. He didn't know why he kept looking there. It felt like there was something waiting for him beyond it. Not danger, not duty, just a truth he hadn't yet uncovered. When Phineas called out for a wrench, Perry instinctively padded toward the shed, nudging the correct tool toward him without thinking. Phineas laughed. "Thanks, Perry. How do you always know exactly what I need?" Perry blinked slowly. He didn't know. He just did. The boys continued their project, full of color and motion. But in Perry's heart, the stillness deepened. The dream had planted something, not sadness, not longing, but a sense of recognition, a knowing that somewhere, somehow, there was another version of himself living a very different kind of day. And yet this life, this quiet one, was no less important. That afternoon, the clouds rolled in. The air turned cool, and the faint scent of rain threaded through the wind. Perry sat on the porch as droplets began to fall, tapping gently against the wooden boards. The sound was rhythmic and peaceful, like a lullaby. He watched the rain without blinking, letting it wash the world into soft gray. The reflection of the yard shimmered on the puddles, the treehouse, the tools, the faint outline of the boys moving about under umbrellas. Each raindrop felt like a memory knocking on glass. Perry leaned forward slightly, eyes half-lidded, and in the ripples of a puddle near his feet, he thought he saw something strange, a shadowy shape, not his own, wearing a small hat. It tilted its head the same way he always did, before fading into the rippling water. He blinked. The image was gone. For a long while, he didn't move. The world was silent except for rain and breath. Then he looked upward again, calm and thoughtful. There was no confusion in his expression, only understanding, or perhaps acceptance. Somewhere deep inside him, that quiet instinct stirred again. But this time, it wasn't restless. It was gentle, almost grateful, like a melody finally finding its harmony. When the rain stopped, the air smelled new. The boys came running back inside, dripping and laughing, leaving muddy footprints across the floor. Linda sighed, half smiling, and fetched towels. Candace rolled her eyes from the stairs, but couldn't hide her grin. And Perry? He simply sat by the doorway, watching them all with a softness that only silence could express. This was his world, quiet, loving, unremarkable, and perfect in its way. He didn't need secret missions or gadgets or code names. He had warmth. He had peace. Yet even as the laughter faded into the comfortable evening hum, he felt a deep awareness settle over him. There was a version of him somewhere out there who had chosen a different path, one of action and duty. And somehow, the two lives, though different, were connected, like twin stars orbiting quietly in the same night. He closed his eyes, a faint sound escaping his throat, not a chirp, not quite a sigh, just a peaceful exhale. The first cricket of the evening sang. A few fireflies returned, blinking between the damp leaves. Phineas turned on the porch light, and its warm yellow glow spilled softly across the yard. Perry watched the light for a long time. It reminded him of something. Maybe the lamp of a secret room, or the steady glow of a screen deep underground. He couldn't remember, but it didn't matter anymore. Both lights, the real one and the imagined one, seemed to belong to him, because maybe in some quiet way he lived both lives at once, the agent of purpose and the pet of peace, one awake, one dreaming, both complete. And as he settled down on the soft mat near the porch, the night wrapped itself around him like a memory finally coming home. Morning came softly again. No alarms, no codes, no rush. Only the slow spill of sunlight through the window blinds and the faint smell of pancakes drifting up from the kitchen. Perry stirred beneath his blanket, the corners of it folding over his tail as he shifted lazily. The world outside hummed with the quiet promise of another ordinary day. But sometimes, ordinary days hold their own kind of courage. He padded out to the kitchen where Phineas sat with a mouthful of syrup-covered waffles. "Morning, Perry," he greeted, voice bright with the sort of enthusiasm that could wake up a sleeping town. "We're thinking of building a music fountain today." Ferb, already at the sink, nodded calmly as he tested a small gear between his fingers. Perry blinked in reply, his usual quiet acknowledgement. Linda hummed in the background, her rhythm steady as the ticking clock. The whole house felt wrapped in a gentle pattern, voices, footsteps, and warmth woven together like the background music of a life that didn't need fixing. Outside, the backyard glistened with dew. A robin sang from the fence post. The air smelled of wet soil and wood varnish, leftovers from yesterday's rain. Phineas and Ferb began hauling out materials, their conversation looping between technical jargon and bursts of laughter. Perry followed them, taking his usual place under the treehouse. The spot had become his domain, half shade, half sun. The grass always a little flattened in the shape of his rest. He watched them assemble pipes and wires, hands moving in cheerful rhythm. To anyone else, it was an ordinary day. But to Perry, every sound, every small movement felt precious, like a secret mission of calm he alone was carrying out. Because if there was no danger to save the world from, perhaps the world still needed saving from restlessness, from noise, from forgetting how to be still. And that, perhaps, was his calling. By midday, the fountain was nearly complete. Sunlight danced off the water as it rose and fell in perfect arcs, each droplet catching a fragment of the sky. Music followed, soft, playful tones that shimmered like laughter turned into sound. Phineas stepped back, hands on his hips. "Looks great, doesn't it, Ferb?" Ferb smiled, a rare, contented grin. "It does indeed." They turned to Perry. "What do you think, buddy?" Perry stared at the fountain for a moment, the rippling light reflecting in his dark eyes. Then, with a slow blink and the faintest tilt of his head, he seemed to say, "He's perfect." The boys laughed. "Knew you'd like it." Water trickled down through the pipes, forming delicate rings that shimmered over the surface. The music mixed with the sound of the wind and the quiet buzz of summer insects. It was simple and beautiful. Perry could have stayed there forever. Later, as the sun began to lower, he wandered toward the far end of the yard. The sky was melting into shades of amber and violet, and the fountain's reflection glowed like liquid light. Perry sat down beside a flower pot and watched the ripples form and fade. He thought, without words, about the world beyond this fence, the places he might never see, the lives he might never live. And yet, he didn't feel longing, just peace, because maybe this was enough. Sometimes the greatest hero isn't the one who changes the world, but the one who preserves a small corner of it, who keeps it gentle, balanced, alive with quiet joy. A soft breeze drifted through the trees, ruffling his fur. He closed his eyes and listened. The laughter of the boys, the whisper of the fountain, the rustle of leaves. Everything was exactly as it should be. When night returned, the sky was clear and endless. Phineas and Ferb had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted but happy, their sketches scattered across the table. Linda had turned off the last of the lights. The house was silent except for the faint hum of crickets outside. Perry, awake by the window, gazed up at the stars. They shimmered faintly, like countless little eyes watching over the world. And for a moment he imagined one of them blinking back, a star that knew the other version of him, the one who lived in shadowed rooftops and secret lairs. He raised a small paw to the glass, a gesture half salute, half good night. Then he turned away, curling into his soft cushion. His breathing slowed, blending into the rhythm of the world around him. In his dreams there were no battles or villains, only calm skies, golden mornings, and the soft laughter of the people he loved. And somewhere, deep inside the dream, a voice echoed faintly, not of command or mission, but of understanding. "You've always been a hero, Perry, just in your own quiet way." The night deepened. The fountain outside still whispered its gentle tune. The stars looked on in silence. And as the moonlight fell softly over the sleeping house, Perry drifted into peace, neither agent nor ordinary pet, but something in between, a quiet guardian of simple moments, a creature who had learned that even stillness could be brave. The world exhaled, the story rested. Segment 2, Echoes of Instinct. Morning in Danville carried the gentle hum of life awakening. The sky was pale gold and washed with light gray clouds that looked like they'd been brushed across the horizon by half-sleepy hands. The Flynn Fletcher backyard shimmered with tiny stars caught on blades of grass. Phineas and Ferb were already busy near the treehouse, sketching out blueprints that only they could truly decipher. And Perry sat quietly nearby, half in shadow, half in sun. His small eyes followed the boys as they spoke in soft excitement about music you can taste and rainbows that hum. The words didn't matter. What mattered was the tone light, filled with warmth, the sound of imagination breathing. It was the kind of peace that most creatures only dream of. Yet inside Perry there was a sound that didn't belong to peace. It was faint, so faint he might have ignored it, if not for how steady it was. A rhythm that came and went like a pulse beneath the calm. Not a noise he could hear, but something deeper, a pattern in his chest, a tug behind his ribs. Sometimes it rose when the wind shifted. Sometimes it whispered when the world went still. He couldn't remember when it started. Maybe it had always been there. That morning, as Phineas lifted a small speaker prototype and declared that this might just work, Perry felt it again, a small spark running down his back, a muscle tightening for no reason. His head turned before he could stop it, scanning the far end of the yard. His vision lingered on the wooden fence. There was nothing there, just the ivy, the faint rustle of leaves, the lazy buzz of a fly passing by. And yet, his heart gave one small extra beat. He blinked, then looked away. A normal pet, he told himself in his quiet, wordless way. That's what he was. That's what he wanted to be. The rest of the morning unfolded with its usual soft rhythm. The boys tested their new invention, laughter bouncing through the yard. A faint trail of music notes drifted into the air, gentle and silly, like bubbles that sparkled and vanished before touching the ground. Perry watched them from his corner under the treehouse. He stretched, pretending to be drowsy, but his eyes were alert. Somewhere beyond the edges of the fence, a car door slammed. His ears twitched. It wasn't unusual, just a neighbor heading out. But that same quiet pulse returned, a low thrum beneath his calm, telling him to notice, to measure, to watch. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The moment passed like a cloud, and yet the echo of it lingered, like a scent the wind had carried but refused to let go. Later, when the sun hung low and the world took on that dreamy gold that turns ordinary things into memories, Perry wandered towards the back porch. The boys had gone inside for a snack, leaving behind a scattering of tools and half-finished blueprints. He padded across the cool wooden boards and stopped beside a small stack of boxes. From here, he could see the whole yard, the empty hammock, and the soft glow of afternoon, the faint swirl of dust caught in light. It should have been perfect. It was perfect. But the hum was still there. He pressed his paw lightly against the wood, feeling the vibration of the house, soft, steady, alive. The feeling didn't frighten him, it simply made him curious, like there was a note hidden in a familiar song, something he was meant to recognize but couldn't yet name. A flicker of memory brushed his mind, not an image but a sensation, the coolness of metal underfoot, the faint echo of footsteps in a place that wasn't this one, the smell of something sterile and clean, mixed with oil and machinery, and then a soft chime like a distant bell calling someone home. But who? He blinked. The vision dissolved before it could form. The wooden boards beneath him were warm again, real and solid. The hum faded back into the silence of the afternoon. Inside, He could hear Phineas talking something about recalibrating frequencies. Ferb murmured in response, calm as ever. The familiarity of it anchored him. Perry relaxed. He moved to the edge of the porch, sat down, and watched the world settle into stillness again. Across the yard, a single leaf drifted from the treehouse ladder. He followed its path with a quiet focus, the way it turned, hesitated, then gently came to rest beside his tail. There was beauty in small things, he knew. The slow motion of life that never asked for attention, but always deserved it. Maybe that was all he needed to notice, to exist peacefully among those who made the world brighter. And yet, that pulse, always beneath, never gone. When twilight arrived, Perry's eyes were half closed in that calm between wakefulness and dreams. The crickets began their soft chorus, and the air smelled faintly of rain that hadn't come yet. Phineas called from inside, "Good night, Perry," and Ferb added a quiet hum of agreement. Perry blinked in acknowledgement, the motion small and slow. He curled on his mat by the window, watching as the house lights dimmed one by one. The world softened into quiet grays and blue shadows. And just as he was about to drift into sleep, there it was again, the pulse. Soft, persistent, like a memory tapping gently at the door of his dreams. He didn't fight it. He didn't question it. He just breathed slow, deep, steady as the hum carried him into the kind of sleep that isn't escape, but listening. In that stillness, something within him whispered. Not words, not sound, but meaning. Something like, "You remember?" And the world around him, soft and silver in moonlight, seemed to agree. The next morning began with clouds. Not the kind that threatened rain, but soft, pale ones that looked as though they'd been painted into the sky with the gentlest brush. The world seemed quieter than usual, not asleep, just slow, like it had chosen to whisper instead of speak. Perry stirred from his mat by the window, blinking at the dim light filtering through the curtains. Inside the Flynn Fletcher home, everything was peaceful. Phineas was humming somewhere in the kitchen. Ferb's footsteps padded softly across the floorboards, and from the radio came the low hum of morning jazz, gentle and unhurried. It was the kind of morning that usually filled Perry with ease. But today, something in him moved differently, and he felt it again, the faint rhythm beneath his calm. It wasn't unpleasant. It was simply there, a pulse that didn't match his heartbeat, but existed alongside it like two songs playing in the same key but to different tempos. He rose slowly and padded toward the hallway, his reflection caught in the glass of a framed family photo. For a moment he paused. His eyes met his own, calm and still, yet behind them was a depth that didn't quite belong to an ordinary pet. He tilted his head slightly, studying himself, almost waiting for the reflection to blink first. It didn't. Phineas passed by, carrying a stack of toast, and smiled down at him. "Morning, Perry. We're working on something small today. It's a surprise." Ferb nodded silently behind him, already adjusting the small tool belt at his waist. Perry blinked back, slow and peaceful, and followed them outside. The backyard was soft with morning light, cool and silvered at the edges. The boys began setting up what looked like a small antenna on the grass wires, trailing across the ground, each connected to a tiny, glowing crystal. Phineas called it the Dream Frequency Tuner. "It's supposed to detect patterns in brain waves while you sleep," he said proudly. "You know, to see if dreams can make their own music." Ferb adjusted a dial, the faint hum of static rising in response. Perry sat under the treehouse ladder, watching. The hum of the machine mixed with the rhythm in his chest, and for a brief moment, they matched. His eyes flickered upward. It wasn't coincidence. The pitch of the sound resonated with something deep in him, and he found himself focusing on it without meaning to. Ferb noticed the slight twitch of his head. "Looks like Perry's curious." Phineas laughed. "Maybe he's dreaming while awake." They went back to work, but Perry's gaze stayed fixed. The soft static of the device seemed to ripple through the air, reaching for something unseen. It wasn't just sound, it felt alive, as if searching. Without realizing, he shifted closer. The moment his paw brushed the dirt near the device, a faint flicker of blue light passed through the wires. It wasn't bright, just enough to shimmer once, like the glow of a memory. Phineas blinked. "Whoa. Did you see that?" Ferb nodded. "Feedback pulse? Oddly precise." Perry froze, pretending to look away. But the pulse inside him vibrated in perfect harmony with that flicker. It was as if something in the machine had recognized him, or what he used to be. The hum faded, and everything went quiet again. The boys didn't notice anything strange. They went on talking, adjusting knobs and writing notes, while Perry sat motionless beneath the treehouse, heart steady but alert. Something was waking, but not in the way that frightened him. It was more like remembering how to breathe after holding it too long. When the boys went inside for lunch, Perry wandered back toward the antenna. The small crystals still faintly glowed, and when the wind brushed across them, he could almost hear tones too soft for human ears, whispers layered in the air. He listened. The sound wasn't random. It had rhythm, order, like coded messages hidden in wind and light. His instincts told him what to do, even if his mind didn't know why. He moved one of the loose wires slightly, adjusting its angle. The tone shifted lower, smoother, more peaceful. The hum inside him settled. He exhaled slowly, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. For a moment, the yard felt stiller than usual, as if the world had paused to acknowledge the small act. In the afternoon, the clouds thickened, dimming the light. Perry sat beneath the porch, watching raindrops begin to fall. Not heavy rain, just a soft drizzle that painted circles on the ground. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, like the world's heartbeat syncing with his own. He watched the rain run down the wooden steps, each droplet merging into another, until they formed small streams that disappeared into the grass. Something about it felt familiar, the flow, the sound, the gentle predictability of motion. His mind drifted back again to flashes of a different place. Metal corridors, glowing screens, the faint sound of footsteps keeping perfect pace. But this time, the memory came with warmth, not distance, like remembering a dream you once loved. He tilted his head up, letting a few raindrops touch his fur. The water felt cool, grounding, real. He closed his eyes. That hum inside him, and that echo of instinct that didn't belong to another world anymore. It belonged here, too. The pulse of his past didn't conflict with the peace of his present. They were simply two truths that had learned to share a heartbeat. When the rain stopped, the boys came outside again, excited about something new they wanted to test. Phineas held up a blueprint with a grin. "We're building a weather harmonizer next. It's supposed to make the sound of rain match your mood." Perry blinked at them, quiet amusement in his eyes. Ferb smiled faintly. Seems it already works for him. The three of them stood together under the fading gray light, the air clean and cool. For the first time, Perry felt no separation between the two lives that tugged at him. No division between the one he lived and the one he somehow remembered. Instead, there was harmony, subtle but real. The hidden pulse, no longer a secret but a song, one that played quietly beneath the rhythm of every peaceful day. The next evening drifted in without hurry. The world had that calm, violet stillness that only comes when the day has exhaled completely. Streetlights blinked on one by one, casting golden halos through the thin mist that followed the earlier rain. Inside the Flynn Fletcher house, the faint hum of conversation floated between rooms, Phineas and Ferb tinkering, Linda humming softly in the kitchen. And there, in the gentle half-dark, Perry sat by the window, gazing out into the slow-turning night. The reflection in the glass looked back at him. Calm eyes, small frame, perfectly ordinary. But behind that reflection, the shadows deepened, and if he looked long enough, he could almost see shapes moving within them. Not threatening shapes, just familiar ones. He blinked and the moment passed. But the feeling remained. Something about the silence tonight carried meaning. It wasn't empty. It was layered like there were words hidden between the sounds, waiting for someone quiet enough to listen. Perry, being who he was, listened. A faint clatter came from the porch. Nothing alarming, just the sound of a forgotten tool slipping off a bench. Still, before the noise even reached full volume, Perry had already moved. It wasn't thought. It wasn't reflex. It was instinct, pure and seamless. He padded across the floor, silent and precise, his movements economical, too practiced for a pet, too natural to be conscious. By the time he reached the porch, his eyes had already scanned every corner, his body low, breath measured. And then he saw it. A wrench lying on the floor, slowly spinning to a stop. That was all, nothing more. He blinked, the tension easing from his small body. But he stayed there, looking at the tool longer than necessary. Something about the sound it made as it hit the wood had triggered a memory. A faint metallic ring echoing against cold floors. Voices far away, issuing orders or maybe encouragement. The smell of oil and concrete. A corridor with light only at one end. Then a sound sharper, stronger. A mechanical door sliding shut. And a name whispered through static, a name he almost knew, like a word he'd forgotten how to pronounce. He blinked again, the present returning in soft focus. The wrench was still there. The night was still quiet, but his pulse had changed rhythm. When he went back inside, Phineas and Ferb were asleep on the couch, a tangle of blankets and blueprints. The TV played a soft, crackling movie, some old black and white adventure. Perry jumped onto the armrest and sat beside them, still and observant. On the screen, a hero crept through a dark hallway, careful, calm, ready. Perry watched, his eyes half-lidded, but something in his mind followed every move precisely. Like remembering choreography from a dream, every shift of balance, every angle of light on the hero's face felt known. He didn't remember learning it, but his body did. The hum in his chest rose again, stronger this time, steady, guiding, neither urging nor warning. Just reminding. He let it stay. As the movie flickered on, his gaze drifted toward the window again. The moonlight outside was soft and scattered, filtered through thin clouds. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the world washed and still. The faint buzz of the streetlights blended with the low sound of the television until they became one long, soothing note. And beneath that note, that endless, peaceful hum, Perry's instincts began to hum too. Not loudly, not urgently, but enough that, for the first time, he didn't try to ignore them. He closed his eyes and simply allowed the two rhythms to merge the world's quiet breath and his own. And within that unity, faint pictures formed in his mind. A wide control room. Screens lined with blue light. A symbol he didn't recognize but somehow respected. And a voice. Soft, clear, familiar, saying something that sounded like, "At ease, agent." He didn't know what an agent was, But the words settled into him like an echo finding its origin. He opened his eyes. The TV's glow flickered across the room, and the sound of static faded as the film reached its end. Phineas mumbled in his sleep, and Ferb shifted, adjusting the blanket. Perry glanced at them both, the hum within him softening instantly. Whatever that other world was, whatever those memories belonged to it, didn't matter right now. He was here. The instinct that once told him to guard and patrol now told him something gentler. To protect this peace, to keep it safe without anyone noticing. And maybe, he thought, in his own quiet way, that was what instinct truly meant, not remembering who you were, but remembering why. He stayed awake long after the movie ended, the screen now dark, the room painted in silver shadows. Outside, the air shimmered faintly with moisture, carrying the faint scent of night flowers. Somewhere far off, a clock chimed midnight, its sound stretching softly through the silence. Perry tilted his head. That same rhythm again, 3 slow beats, 1 pause. It matched the tapping he'd heard days ago. The one by the fence. He closed his eyes and listened, every sense open, still as the stars. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap. The same pattern, faint and far, as if the world itself was trying to communicate. He didn't move this time. He didn't investigate. He simply listened until the sound faded back into the hum of the night. Then he blinked once, slowly, and let his eyes fall shut. Sleep came gently, like mist rolling in from a remembered shore, carrying fragments of a life he'd never lived, blending them with the calm of the one he did. And as dreams began to form, he found himself standing between both, not choosing one, but simply existing in the quiet space where instinct meets peace, where memory becomes music. Morning arrived like a secret whispered through curtains. The first golden light slid across the floorboards, brushing over scattered blueprints, tiny inventions, and a small fedora lying forgotten near the window. Perry blinked slowly awake, his eyes adjusting to the faint glow. The world was soft, unhurried, that in-between hour where even time itself seems to stretch and yawn. For a moment, he didn't move. He just listened. The house had its own morning rhythm, the kettle beginning to hum, the fridge giving its occasional sigh, the faint creak of the stairs as someone stirred upstairs. These sounds were ordinary to everyone else, but to Perry, they carried the steady heartbeat of home. Yet underneath it all, there was something else quieter, deeper. A sound that wasn't sound. A call that wasn't calling. It pulsed faintly in the back of his mind, almost like the echo of last night's dream. He sat up, the soft blanket slipping down his shoulders, and padded across the living room. The TV screen still held a faint afterglow from the movie's end. On the table lay one of Phineas's sketches, a rough drawing of an underwater glider, its shape sleek and imaginative. The lines were messy, but the idea was full of life. Perry's eyes lingered on it. Something about the drawing stirred a familiar image. Metal corridors again, blue lights, the same triangular emblem. He tilted his head, trying to recall if he had seen it before, or if the memory simply borrowed the lines from this drawing. Sometimes, he thought, the mind didn't remember, it reimagined. He climbed up onto the windowsill and looked out. The backyard still shimmered with dew. The air was cool, full of that early light that makes everything seem possible. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of the city stirring reached him. Traffic beginning, a dog barking, life slowly unfolding. And as the world woke, so did that quiet rhythm within him. He watched as Phineas stumbled sleepily out onto the porch, hair tousled, holding a mug far too big for him. "Morning, Perry," he mumbled with a yawn, setting the mug down on the railing before glancing toward the horizon. "It's going to be a good day. I can feel it." Perry blinked, then gave his usual low trill, soft and content. Ferb followed a moment later, silent as ever, carrying a small notebook. He opened it, wrote something quickly, then held it up for Phineas. Perry couldn't read the words from here, but he could tell it was an idea, another one of their endless, wonderful ideas. The brothers shared that same quiet excitement that always made the world brighter. Perry watched them, his chest filling with a warmth that made the night's strange dreams feel distant and harmless. And yet, even as the laughter started, that faint pulse inside him didn't fade. It didn't intrude either. It simply was. A reminder, perhaps, that even peace carries a history, and instinct, once awakened, never truly sleeps again. As the morning deepened, Perry went about his quiet rituals. He fetched the newspaper from the porch, checked the small corners of the house as though by habit, and paused every so often, head slightly tilted, as if listening for something beyond sound. Sometimes it was nothing, the soft rustle of leaves, the creak of old wood. But sometimes, just barely, he could hear it again. The faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 pause, tap. Only this time it didn't feel mysterious, it felt reassuring. A signal, perhaps, not to summon him away, but to tell him that the world beyond his backyard was still there, waiting patiently. And that one day, when the time was right, he would know what to do. That night, when the stars returned, Perry lay beneath the open window. A cool breeze moved through the curtains, brushing over his fur. The soft hum of crickets filled the spaces between thoughts, between breaths. He wasn't searching for meaning anymore. The images, the echoes, the half-remembered corridors, they could wait. All that mattered was this: the peace he guarded, the family that trusted him without knowing why, and the rhythm that guided him from within. He felt no conflict between them now, only balance. And in that balance, something small but certain began to grow, not awareness exactly, but readiness. The kind that doesn't disturb peace, but protects it more completely. He blinked slowly, his eyes half-lidded. The stars reflected in them like scattered pieces of memory. Somewhere deep inside, instinct stirred one last time before sleep, offering a single, clear message that didn't need words. Be still for now. The world remembers you. Perry exhaled softly, a quiet sound that could have been a sigh or simply the night settling deeper. The moon climbed higher, bathing the room in silver calm. Phineas and Ferb slept peacefully upstairs, their dreams full of inventions and laughter. And down below, their silent protector drifted into slumber, neither agent nor pet, neither memory nor mystery. Just Perry, the platypus, perfectly at peace between both worlds. S3, The Life He Never Knew. The days moved softly through the middle of summer. Light spilled lazily through the Flynn Fletcher backyard where the air always shimmered with some half-finished invention or daydream. Phineas and Ferb were at it again, tinkering under the shade of the treehouse, their quiet laughter rising and falling with the hum of tools. And in the middle of that cheerful rhythm was Perry, still, calm, unbothered. From his place on the porch steps, he watched the world turn in slow harmony. The clink of wrenches, the rustle of grass, the soft thump of footsteps, every sound seemed familiar, almost too familiar. He'd heard it all before, countless times, yet lately it felt different. He didn't know why. When Phineas laughed, there was a flicker in Perry's mind, not a memory, but a sensation. A sudden image of bright lights flashing on metal, of rooms that echoed and hummed. He blinked once, twice, and the image vanished like ripples fading from water. Phineas turned to him, smiling. "Hey, Perry, what do you think of our new project?" Ferb held up a drawing, a half-built glider shaped like a fish, its wings stretched wide. Perry tilted his head and gave his soft, polite trill. Phineas grinned. "He likes it." They returned to work, and Perry stayed watching. But the faintest thought lingered in the back of his mind, a quiet echo, too gentle to chase, yet too persistent to ignore. That night, when the air cooled and the day finally sighed into darkness, Perry sat by the window. The house had gone still. The only movement came from the curtain shifting with the breeze. Moonlight touched the floor in soft silver bands, catching on small traces of invention bolts, paper sketches, pieces of wonder scattered by young hands. He stared at his reflection in the glass, a simple face, familiar and calm. But behind that reflection, the night outside seemed to breathe differently. There were shapes in the dark, nothing clear, just impressions. The outline of a corridor, a light flashing in rhythm, a soft, metallic sound like a door closing far away. His chest rose, then fell, steady but uncertain. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't memory either. It was something between. The next morning came quietly. Phineas and Ferb were already outside by the time Perry padded into the kitchen. The smell of toast and fresh air filled the house. "Morning, Perry," Phineas called from the yard, waving a screwdriver. "We're fixing up one of our old gadgets. Want to watch?" He stepped outside. The sunlight was bright, and the boys stood near a pile of half-finished contraptions, a metal disc, a glider frame, a small motor still ticking faintly from its last use. Ferb picked up the disc and spun it in his hand. It caught the sunlight and flashed across Perry's eyes. For a heartbeat, the world around him vanished. He was standing somewhere else. A place that smelled of oil and steel, blue light, screens flickering with coded text, and a voice distant, calm, saying something he couldn't quite understand. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Perry?" Phineas's voice cut through the haze. You okay?" Perry blinked once, then twice. He gave his usual quiet trill and returned to his place under the shade. Phineas smiled and went back to work, none the wiser. But Perry didn't look away from the disc again. Later, when the sun fell and the world turned gold, he sat once more at the porch steps. The yard glowed with the evening stillness. The trees whispered softly in the wind, and fireflies began to spark in the distance. Somewhere in that gentle hush, he felt it again, that pulse beneath calm, a sense of something unspoken reaching toward him from a life he never remembered living. He didn't chase it. He just listened. And for now, that was enough. The following day drifted by like a sigh. Soft clouds lingered above the rooftops, and the air carried that sweet warmth that only late afternoon brings. Phineas and Ferb had built a small weather balloon, nothing too ambitious, just a test flight to see how high it can go. Perry watched from the porch as they launched it. The silver balloon rose steadily into the sky, the thin string trailing like a silver thread through sunlight. "It's working," Phineas called, shading his eyes. Ferb gave a small nod, scribbling notes in his ever-present pad. To anyone else, it was just another summer experiment. But as the balloon floated higher, something in Perry's chest tightened. The shape of it, round, silver, glinting against blue, sparked something deep within him. He'd seen that shape before. Not here. Not in this quiet backyard. But in a place colder, wider, full of blinking lights and distant hums. He closed his eyes, and for a brief instant the world changed. He was standing in a vast room. A platform stretched before him, surrounded by screens glowing a deep blue. Across the walls, the same shape, that silver circle repeated over and over in neat patterns. A voice echoed faintly from somewhere above, calm and direct. "Agent, report." The word cut through his mind like light through fog. He didn't know who had spoken it, but he knew the sound of it belonged to him, or rather, to the version of him that lived in that other life. The scene flickered, fading before he could grasp it. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was back, soft and harmless, the balloon still rising into the sunlight. Phineas laughed. "Look, it's almost gone." Perry blinked slowly, letting the dream dissolve. He gave his quiet trill and returned to his usual calm, but the echo of that single word, agent, lingered. As evening came, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Phineas and Ferb packed up their notes, and soon the backyard grew still again. Inside, the soft rhythm of night began. Dishes clinking, Linda humming, the house settling into its familiar calm. Perry sat by the window once more, the same place where he'd watched shadows move days ago. Outside, lightning flashed faintly in the distance, far enough away to look gentle, just brief silver glows behind clouds. With each flash, his reflection lit up, and for the briefest moment, it wasn't his reflection he saw. It was another face, still his, but sharper somehow, focused, determined. He blinked, and the illusion vanished, leaving only his calm, drowsy expression behind. He turned from the window, padding softly toward the small table near the couch. There, among the boy's sketches, lay the metal fragment he had found by the fence the night before. They must have brought it inside without realizing it. He approached it slowly, eyes tracing its surface. The faint blue glow that had pulsed before was gone, or maybe it was hiding. Either way, it didn't feel ordinary. As he touched it gently, warmth spread through his paw. The air around him shifted, just slightly. And for a second, he wasn't in the living room anymore. He was underwater, the pressure, the muted echoes, the pulse of engines all around. He could feel movement, purpose, and something inside him whispering that this wasn't imagination. Then the moment ended. The glow faded. He was back in the quiet of home, standing beside the couch. Rain began to fall outside, soft, rhythmic, comforting. Phineas laughed faintly from upstairs, probably retelling their day's adventure to Ferb. The house hummed with sleepy contentment. Perry looked once more at the small metal fragment before nudging it gently under the table, where it disappeared into shadow. He didn't need to understand it yet. Some truths, he sensed, would reveal themselves when the time was right. He returned to the window, watching raindrops trace slow, glowing paths down the glass. Each drop caught a bit of reflected light, tiny silver glimmers drifting downward like memories he hadn't met yet. And as thunder rumbled faintly beyond the clouds, he closed his eyes, feeling that same quiet connection to something unseen. Whatever life he once lived, wherever it existed, it hadn't left him. It had only grown quiet, waiting patiently beneath the calm. Morning light shimmered across the damp lawn. Drops of rain still clung to the grass, and the air carried the clean scent that follows a quiet night storm. The sky was pale blue, almost white at the horizon, and the whole world seemed freshly washed. Perry stepped out onto the porch, stretching lazily. The boards were cool beneath his feet. Somewhere inside, Phineas and Ferb were already awake, their voices carrying in cheerful fragments through the open window. "Today is the perfect day for testing the hoverboard," Phineas said. Ferb replied with a single, calm nod, his usual way. Perry tilted his head, listening as they gathered tools and materials. Their excitement had a rhythm of its own, familiar and comforting. But beneath that warmth he felt another rhythm, softer, steadier, almost like the faint beat of something underwater. He followed it unconsciously, his gaze drifting toward the pond at the back of the yard. The surface shimmered like glass. Every ripple caught the morning sun, scattering reflections across his face. He stepped closer. The faint hum inside him grew louder. The pond was small and still a mirror for clouds. He leaned over the edge and watched his reflection ripple with every breath of wind. But something about it seemed different. The eyes that looked back weren't just his own. They held depth as if they had seen farther than this backyard could ever reach. A single drop of water fell from a leaf above, touching the surface. The circles spread outward, distorting the reflection, and for a heartbeat, Perry saw movement beneath. Shapes. Lights. The faint outline of something mechanical, gliding through a different kind of stillness. The image lasted only a second, but his body reacted before his mind could question it. His stance shifted. Muscles tensed, not from fear, but readiness. Then he blinked, and the pond was just a pond again. He sat back slowly, the quiet hum fading into his heartbeat. By midday, the boy's latest invention was ready. The hoverboard buzzed with gentle energy, balanced on a cushion of air that rippled the grass. "Here goes nothing," Phineas said, stepping onto it. The board wobbled, lifted, then steadied, gliding forward with a faint, whirring sound. Perry watched, expression calm as ever, but something in that sound, the rise and fall of the pitch, the vibration in the air, pulled at his attention. It wasn't the board he was hearing. It was a memory of engines. Not loud ones, deep, measured hums beneath the surface of water. Subtle vibrations running through metal. A world that existed below, unseen yet deeply known. He could almost smell it, salt and oil and electricity, mixed into a strange sort of calm. Phineas laughed as the hoverboard looped clumsily through the air. "Perry, did you see that?" He blinked, then gave a small trill. Phineas smiled, completely unaware that his pet's mind had just drifted miles beneath their feet. Later, when the sun began to set, Perry found himself by the pond again. The water was darker now, reflecting only the pale orange of dusk. Fireflies drifted above the surface, their light trembling like tiny signals in the air. He lowered himself near the edge, listening. The hum he'd felt earlier returned, gentler this time, not a call, but a memory softly replaying itself. For a moment, he imagined diving in, not into the pond itself, but through it, as though the surface were a doorway to the life waiting below. He could almost see it. Long corridors of metal, soft blue glows, the whisper of unseen machinery. And at the center of it all himself, standing tall, steady, knowing exactly what every light meant. The thought wasn't frightening, it was peaceful. He blinked, and the image dissolved into ripples again. The pond lay still, quiet and harmless. As night settled, the air cooled. The sky deepened into indigo, and the first stars began to appear. Perry stayed by the water until the last of the light faded. He didn't feel lost between two worlds, not anymore. The life he never knew wasn't gone. It simply waited beneath the surface, calm and patient, like everything else in him. He stood, stretching once more, and turned back toward the warm glow of the house. The sound of laughter drifted out through the windows, Phineas and Ferb talking over their evening snack. Perry's steps were slow, steady, peaceful. He didn't need to chase the memories. He just needed to be ready when they came. And under the quiet sky, that readiness felt almost like remembering. The house had grown quiet again. Phineas and Ferb had drifted off to bed, their latest blueprints scattered across the table. The last lamp flickered softly in the corner, painting the room in shades of gold and sleep. Outside, the night hummed gently crickets, wind, and the distant murmur of the street, all blending into one slow, even rhythm. Perry sat by the window, his silhouette outlined against the soft glow. His hat, the small, unassuming piece that meant so much more, rested beside him. He didn't wear it often around the boys, but tonight his paw brushed against it, almost unconsciously. The texture beneath his touch sparked something not a sharp memory, but a slow, spreading warmth. It was the feel of duty and purpose, of shadows and quiet motion, of something that had never truly left him. He closed his eyes. The sound of the house faded. In its place came the hush of deep water. It was calm down there, always calm. The kind of calm that existed before sound, before light. Shapes drifted through it, outlines of corridors, faint glimmers of control panels, the soft pulse of screens that seemed to breathe. He moved through it effortlessly in his mind, gliding as if his body remembered every turn, every soundless footstep, every subtle code of light and gesture. Then in the silence, a single tone rang out, deep and resonant, like a distant call through the ocean. It wasn't urgent or commanding. It was familiar, a reminder. He opened his eyes slowly. The house came back into focus, the light from the lamp warm against his face. He realized he was still sitting by the window, but the calm he'd felt beneath the water hadn't left him. It lingered, humming quietly through his chest. For the first time, he didn't try to push it away. A soft creak came from the hallway. Phineas, half asleep, shuffled into the room, rubbing his eyes. "Hey, Perry," he murmured, voice heavy with drowsiness. "You're still up?" Perry blinked once, then gave a quiet trill. Phineas smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep either, huh? Guess my brain's still spinning with hoverboard ideas." He leaned against the window beside Perry, staring out into the night. "It's funny, you know. Sometimes I feel like there's more going on than I can see. Like everyone's got this secret adventure happening behind their eyes." Perry tilted his head, studying him quietly. Phineas yawned, stretching. "Anyway, good night, buddy." He reached out and patted Perry's head gently before wandering back to bed, leaving the night still and quiet once again. Perry turned his gaze to the window once more. The moonlight shimmered faintly across the pond outside, the same water that had held his reflection and the faint memory beneath it. He picked up his hat, turning it once in his paws. Then, instead of putting it on, he set it gently beside him again. There was no need for disguise tonight, no missions, no shadows. Just stillness. The water outside rippled faintly, though no breeze stirred the surface. The light caught it in such a way that, for an instant, he thought he saw a familiar insignia reflected there, faint, shifting, then gone. He smiled, a small, invisible smile that only the night could see. The sounds of the house settled into a steady rhythm, soft breaths, distant snores, the ticking of a clock that counted time without hurry. And through it all, Perry sat unmoving, perfectly at peace. The life he never knew wasn't truly gone. It wasn't hidden or erased or forgotten. It was folded carefully within him, not as a secret to guard, but as a truth to rest upon. He didn't need to live in two worlds anymore. He simply was. The agent, the pet, the protector, the friend. All of it, quiet and complete under the same calm sky. He closed his eyes. Outside, a single firefly drifted past the window, glowing once before fading into the dark. And in that stillness, Everything past and present finally felt whole. S4, a different kind of hero. The sun rose slowly over the quiet street, casting gold and pale orange light through the neighborhood trees. The air still carried a cool whisper from the night, brushing softly through the curtains of the Flynn Fletcher house. Inside, the morning unfolded with its usual gentle rhythm, the rustle of breakfast being made, the faint creak of the stairs, and the sleepy hum of a new day beginning. On the windowsill, Perry stirred. His tail flicked once as the light touched his fur. He blinked open his eyes and lifted his head, his gaze drifting across the room. Everything felt calm, ordinary, safe. Phineas' voice soon filled the air, bright and full of ideas before the clock had even struck 8. "Ferb, I know what we're going to do today." The words carried the same spark they always did, echoing lightly through the house. Perry listened from his corner, his expression calm but attentive. He knew this tone well. It always meant invention, laughter, and the promise of another small adventure that somehow fit neatly within the peace of summer. He yawned softly and slid off the windowsill, padding towards the kitchen. Phineas and Ferb were already there, papers scattered across the table, blueprints full of impossible angles and wild imagination, their breakfast set mostly untouched, as they debated the finer details of something they called the Neighborhood Helper 3000. It's not about being a superhero, Phineas was saying. It's more about helping people in quiet ways, like bringing someone's mail when it rains or picking up their groceries if they drop them. Ferb nodded. "A hero of convenience." "Exactly," Phineas grinned. "Small things that make big days better." Perry paused in the doorway, his head tilting slightly. The words echoed in him more deeply than he expected. A hero of convenience. Quiet help. It was oddly familiar. He trilled softly, as if approving, and Phineas smiled. "You like it, huh, Perry? Maybe you can help us test it later." The platypus blinked in his usual calm way and waddled to his food bowl. But as he ate, his eyes drifted again toward the sunlight streaming in through the window, that soft, golden light that made even ordinary mornings feel meaningful. By mid-morning, the boys had rolled their invention outside. It wasn't flashy, just a small, wheeled machine with gentle lights and a basket mounted on its back. It beeped softly, almost politely, as Phineas adjusted a dial. "This one's about simple good deeds," he said proudly. "No lasers, no rockets, no drama." Ferb pressed a button, and the machine hummed to life, rolling forward in a perfect straight line before delivering a small watering can to Isabella, who had just arrived. "Oh, thanks," she said, smiling. "That's so sweet." Perry watched from beneath the shade of the treehouse. There was something quietly perfect about the scene. No chaos, no danger. Just small kindnesses moving through the air like sunlight. He remembered days when heroism had looked very different: high-speed chases, coded messages, hidden doors, the thrill of solving something impossible. But now, as he sat in the slow rhythm of summer, it struck him how peaceful it felt to see good done simply, without noise or reward. Maybe this, too, was a kind of heroism. The machine soon began its rounds, helping Baljeet carry his books, handing a paintbrush to Buford, even offering a flower to a neighbor watering her garden. The neighborhood smiled more that day, and Perry, sitting quietly beneath the treehouse, felt a kind of pride that was softer than anything he'd known before. He didn't need to leap into action. He didn't need to save the world. Sometimes the world didn't need saving, just small, quiet reminders that goodness could still move gently among people. As the afternoon light warmed and the sound of laughter drifted through the air, Perry closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He could feel that quiet heroism everywhere in the sunlight, in the invention's hum. and in the soft steadiness of his own heart. The day didn't need grandeur. It just needed peace. By early afternoon, the sun had settled high over the neighborhood, scattering warm gold across the lawns and rooftops. A soft breeze moved through the trees, stirring leaves into slow, thoughtful dances. Phineas and Ferb were still tinkering with their invention, adjusting gears and sensors, while laughter and chatter filled the air. Perry lingered near the garden, half in sunlight, half in shade. His eyes followed the little helper machine as it trundled down the sidewalk, delivering folded paper notes of kindness the boys had written for their neighbors. It was a simple idea, yet it carried a rare warmth, a quiet chain of good spreading from one house to the next. "Perry," Phineas called cheerfully, "can you make sure the notes don't blow away?" The platypus blinked once and waddled off obediently, though there was something more than obedience in his step. As he moved, his sharp eyes noticed things others wouldn't, a loose gate swinging too freely, a tipped-over flower pot, a bird tangled briefly in ribbon. He moved without hurry, but with purpose, setting things right in small, nearly invisible ways. It wasn't a mission, not officially, but it felt like one. He reached the corner where the shade of an old oak fell across the sidewalk. The helper robot had paused, its wheels caught in a patch of uneven ground. Perry bent down, pushing gently against its side until it rolled free again. Its lights blinked twice in thanks, a small, polite gesture that made him smile inwardly. He followed as it continued its slow journey, leaving faint tracks in the dust. Around them, the neighborhood carried on. The distant bark of a dog, the creak of a bicycle chain, the rhythmic sound of a sprinkler ticking across a front yard. It was an ordinary afternoon, but Perry's instincts noticed the subtleties, how easily peace could be kept or broken. Near the end of the block, an elderly neighbor struggled to carry a heavy watering can. Perry hesitated for a moment, then padded quietly toward her. She smiled when she saw him. "Oh, hello there, little one," she said, setting the can down with a sigh. "Out for a stroll?" Perry gave a soft trill, then nudged the watering can handle gently with his bill, helping her lift it just enough to steady her grip. She chuckled, patting his head. "Well, aren't you a helpful little hero?" The word made something stir in him. Hero, it wasn't shouted or ceremonious. It was said with simple gratitude, the kind that didn't need to be remembered to matter. As he made his way back toward the Flynn Fletcher yard, the light began to soften, growing warmer and richer. The air carried a faint sweetness of mowed grass, and the distant hum of evening settling in. Phineas waved as Perry returned. "Thanks for watching over the Helper 3000, Perry. We're calling today's test a success." Ferb nodded. Many smiles were achieved. Perry blinked in quiet agreement. The boys turned their attention back to cleaning up the yard, leaving Perry to rest beneath the treehouse again. He watched the helper robot power down, its lights dimming to a peaceful glow. The neighborhood had grown calm, full of the quiet after a kind day. In that silence, Perry realized something he'd never quite understood before. Not every mission needed danger. Not every act of bravery needed a shadow to hide behind. Sometimes heroism was a whisper, gentle, unseen, and perfectly enough. Evening began its slow descent across the town. The golden edges of the day melted into soft rose and lavender, and shadows stretched long and gentle over the lawns. The hum of daytime faded into the tranquil rhythm of dusk crickets starting their song, sprinklers clicking off one by one, and the faint clatter of dinner plates echoing from nearby windows. From his quiet perch beneath the treehouse, Perry watched the neighborhood settle. The Helper 3000 rested nearby, its soft blue light pulsing faintly as it recharged. Around him, the air held a pleasant stillness, the kind that made the world feel slower, as though every sound knew it had permission to be gentle. Phineas and Ferb were still outside, talking over plans for tomorrow's project. Their voices rose and fell like music in the background, the familiar hum of imagination drifting into the cooling air. Perry listened absently, but his mind was somewhere else on the day's small chain of kindnesses that had unfolded like ripples in still water. He thought of the watering can, the flower pot, the laughter of the neighbor who had called him a hero without knowing the weight of that word. It was strange how deeply that single word lingered, not because he sought it, but because it had arrived softly without expectation or ceremony. Maybe the measure of a hero wasn't in what the world could see, but in what it quietly became because of them. He stood and wandered toward the pond, his reflection meeting him in the dimming light. The surface mirrored a dusky sky filled with drifting amber clouds and the first hints of stars. Fireflies floated above the grass like tiny lanterns blinking in loose, sleepy rhythm. Perry crouched at the water's edge. A leaf floated past, turning lazily in the ripples, and he dipped a paw into the cool surface. For a moment, the motion stirred something inside him, a memory, faint and wordless, of moving through far deeper waters. Back then, every decision had mattered. Every second had been measured by duty, precision, and instinct. But here there was only peace. He realized he didn't miss the noise. He didn't need it. The rhythm of quiet purpose that was enough. Behind him, the boys' laughter faded as they went inside. The lights in the windows began to glow, spilling warm gold onto the grass. Perry stayed a while longer, feeling the gentle pulse of the world around him. A soft wind passed, and with it came the faint sound of someone humming, a neighbor, maybe, closing their door for the night. It was a small, ordinary sound, but it carried such comfort that Perry found himself closing his eyes. There was a kind of balance here, the kind he'd never noticed before. One where every sound, every small act, and every still moment played a quiet role in keeping things right. When he opened his eyes again, the stars had deepened, their reflections glimmering faintly in the pond. He stared at them for a long time before standing and turning back toward the house. The night would soon grow still, and in that stillness, the world would rest, watched over not by grand gestures, but by quiet hearts. The night settled gently over Danville, folding the town in layers of soft blue and silver. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting golden pools across the pavement. From somewhere distant came the faint sound of a car passing. Then the soft hum of stillness returned. Inside the Flynn Fletcher house, most lights had dimmed. The day's inventions were packed away, their quiet hums replaced by the tender rhythm of a home preparing for sleep. A fan whirred softly in Phineas' room. Ferb's lamp glowed faintly through the curtains. Everything was wrapped in a peaceful calm that carried no urgency, no unfinished business, only rest. Perry stood near the doorway of the backyard, the moonlight stretching across the grass like a thin silver blanket. He looked toward the pond again, the same pond that had reflected so many of his thoughts these past few days. Tonight, its surface was perfectly still, holding the stars as though afraid to disturb them. He took a slow breath. It wasn't just air, it was awareness, the soft pulse of life that filled every quiet space. He could feel the weight of the world, not as a burden, but as something gentle, shared, and infinitely calm. For a moment he thought about all the missions he'd once raced through, the secret codes, the narrow escapes, the shadows he'd slipped between. They had purpose, yes, but they were loud, sharp, fleeting. This quiet life carried its own kind of purpose. Here, he wasn't an agent or a name whispered through hidden channels. He was simply Perry, a presence that watched, steadied, and understood. A part of something small and kind that didn't need saving, only tending. As a soft wind brushed through the trees, a single firefly drifted close, circling lazily before landing on a nearby blade of grass. Its light glowed faintly pulsing, fading, then glowing again. Perry watched it for a long time. That light reminded him of everything he'd learned without realizing that real strength wasn't in how brightly something burned, but in how gently it stayed. From inside the house, Phineas' sleepy voice floated through the open window. "Good night, Perry." He trilled softly in reply, a sound so quiet it blended with the night. He could hear the faint rustle as Phineas rolled over, the creak of the floor as Ferb turned off the last lamp. One by one, the sounds of the house faded into silence. And there, in that silence, Perry felt whole. The moon climbed higher, silvering the world in calm light. Every leaf shimmered faintly. Every corner of the yard seemed touched by stillness. The pond reflected it all, moon, stars, and the steady figure watching from the grass. He sat down, closing his eyes, breathing slowly. The day's moments replayed quietly, the smile of the old neighbor, the warmth of Phineas's laughter, the hum of kindness that had passed from one heart to another. None of it would make the headlines. None of it would echo in secret halls. But it mattered. It all mattered. A soft sound, maybe a sigh of wind. Maybe the world itself drifted through the air as Perry lowered his head, calm and content. The light of the firefly still pulsed faintly nearby. It didn't blaze or fade. It simply stayed. And in that glow, Perry found something more enduring than heroism, a quiet truth. That peace itself could be an act of courage. The night held him in stillness, and for once, stillness was enough. S5. The city without an agent. Morning came quietly to the city. Not the sharp rush of alarms and footsteps, but a slow, drifting kind of dawn, pale sunlight, creeping through tall buildings, sliding down glass and stone until it reached the streets below. The world felt different today, softer, slower, as if something beneath the surface had paused to breathe. The park fountains shimmered in silence, their usual rhythm slightly off, the sound gentler and more hollow. Birds darted between lampposts, their wings cutting through the early mist. Delivery trucks rolled by at half their usual speed. Everything seemed to be waiting, though for what? No one could quite tell. In a small corner cafe, a man stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, eyes distant. Across the street, a bus idled longer than it should have. A few pigeons gathered on a bench, cooing softly, unbothered by the stillness. The city looked the same, familiar corners, familiar sounds, but it felt emptier in a way that couldn't be measured by sight. The truth was simple. The city was without its quiet guardian today. Down below the ordinary hum, deep beneath layers of steel and stone, a set of corridors sat empty. No lights blinked in sequence. No screens flickered with coded updates. A single chair, perfectly aligned at a small desk, remained still untouched since the night before. The air here usually held purpose. Faint static from old monitors, the soft echo of webbed footsteps moving with rhythm and certainty. But now that rhythm was gone. The headquarters, once alive with quiet precision, had fallen into sleep. A small screen on the far wall blinked once, as though testing if anyone was there to notice. Then it too dimmed back into rest. For the first time in years, there was no mission, no coded call, no agent moving silently through the shadows of morning. Above, the city went on. It didn't collapse or lose its shape. People still woke up, went to work, greeted each other politely at crosswalks. The trains still came on time. But some invisible pattern was missing. There were moments when small things slipped through the cracks. A dropped wallet left unnoticed near a bench. A park gate left unlatched, creaking softly in the wind. A sparrow's nest tipped slightly too far over its branch. They were tiny details, things no one else would think twice about. But once they had always been seen, quietly fixed, never mentioned. The world hadn't realized how much it relied on an unseen hand, keeping its calm intact. Now those small things gathered quietly, like dust settling in corners of a house when no one is home. At the edge of the city, a stray breeze passed through an alleyway, lifting a small piece of paper. It fluttered upward, catching sunlight before landing gently at the foot of a wall marked with faint, almost invisible scratches, the kind that only one pair of eyes would recognize. The mark meant here. It was part of a pattern that mapped the hidden paths beneath the city, the routes of someone who had always walked them alone, never leaving a trace except in the way things stayed peaceful. But today, no one passed by. The air stayed still. The mark stayed waiting. And the city, without even realizing it, began to miss what it could not name. Far away, somewhere quiet, Perry slept. Not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, a kind of rest the body only takes when it knows the world can hold itself for a while. The light through the blinds brushed across his face, tracing faint lines of gold and dust. The house above him hummed faintly with life. Phineas and Ferb beginning their day, unaware that their silent friend had chosen not to move, not to vanish behind secret doors. For once the world would go on without its hidden protector, and maybe in that stillness it would learn what his presence had always meant. The day stretched onward, unhurried yet strangely weightless. The city carried on, cars humming softly along the roads, children's laughter weaving faintly between buildings, but underneath it all lingered a faint, almost invisible gap. It wasn't something people could point to. It wasn't a broken bridge or a power outage or even silence. It was more like a missing beat in a song everyone knew by heart, a rhythm that held things together without them ever realizing it. In the park, Isabella was walking her dog when she noticed how the air felt unusually still. The leaves barely moved, though the breeze should have been steady by now. She glanced toward the far end of the trail where a familiar teal shape might have once passed through, quick, calm, unnoticed. But today the path was empty. She shrugged it off and continued her walk. Yet something about the quiet stayed with her. It was almost comforting, in a bittersweet way, as if the city itself was catching its breath. At Doofenshmirtz, Evil Incorporated, the silence had a different tone. Hines stood in his lab, holding a wrench and staring at the half-finished invention before him. Normally, this was when a trap door would open, or a sudden quack would echo through the vents. Something unexpected, something to remind him of the game they always played. But today, nothing happened. He waited and then sighed. "Well, that's odd," he muttered, tapping the wrench on the table. Usually by now he'd have burst in through, a window or something ridiculous like that. He walked over to the window himself, looked out at the clear blue sky, and frowned in quiet confusion. "You know," he said to no one, "I don't even know what to do when he's not around. Is that weird?" It feels weird." The words echoed softly through the lab. Then for once, Hines smiled a little, not his usual mischievous grin, but something smaller, more thoughtful. "Maybe he's on vacation," he said gently. Even platypuses need vacations, right?" He returned to his desk, but the thought lingered. The world felt different without the push and pull of that odd friendship. Across town, Phineas and Ferb were busy sketching something new, a blueprint, that stretched across half the backyard table. They worked quietly, the way they always did, but even they could sense that something in the air had shifted. Phineas paused mid-line and looked toward the small tree where Perry usually disappeared each morning. The trapdoor beneath the treehouse was still untouched since dawn. "Huh," he said softly. "He's been sleeping in a lot lately." Ferb gave a small nod, not looking up from his sketch. The two boys didn't talk much about it. They trusted Perry, always had, but there was something about his absence that made the day feel slower. They continued working, yet the rhythm wasn't quite the same. The hours drifted. The sun slid low, gold washing over rooftops and quiet windows. The city, though peaceful, felt like it was adjusting to something it didn't understand, a shift too gentle to name, but too real to ignore. And in that adjustment came small acts of care. A neighbor offered to fix another's fence. A stranger picked up a lost scarf and hung it neatly on a post. A child returned a forgotten toy to the sandbox instead of keeping it. It was as if the city was learning unconsciously, naturally, to take care of itself, to step into the space left behind by the one who'd always watched silently from the edges. In the calm of evening, the streetlights began to glow one by one. And somewhere deep within that quiet city, an unseen ripple of balance formed again, not because the agent had returned, but because his influence had never truly left. The world was remembering him in the smallest, kindest ways. Night fell softly over the city, wrapping everything in quiet shades of blue and gold. The hum of distant cars faded into a low whisper, and the lamps along the streets glowed like faint constellations. Windows flickered gently with life television screens, bedtime lamps, warm silhouettes behind curtains. The city was winding down, unaware of how much it had adapted to its missing rhythm. Deep beneath that peaceful stillness, behind walls no one could see, something stirred. It wasn't movement exactly, more like memory reawakening. The hidden bass, silent all day, hummed faintly with the echo of old systems checking themselves. A single red light blinked, hesitated, then faded. The space still carried his presence, faint prints on the floor. The smell of oil and clean metal, the calm precision of a life lived in quiet cycles. Somewhere within that darkness, a console flickered on for just a moment. No message, no alert. Just the faint pulse of recognition, like a heartbeat remembering what it's meant to do. Above, the air was heavy with dreamlight. The stars shimmered lazily, half veiled by thin clouds. Phineas and Ferb were already asleep, their blueprints spread messily across the workbench. The gentle rustle of paper mixed with the rhythmic chirp of crickets outside. In his small corner of the house, Perry slept too, curled up with his hat beside him, breathing slow and even. But deep inside that calm, something within him stirred. Dreams came, unhurried and strange. He wasn't in the house anymore, or the city. He stood in a space between a landscape of shifting blues and soft silver. There was water everywhere, still and glass-like, stretching endlessly under a sky that shimmered like moonlit silk. He walked, or perhaps floated, through this world that felt both new and deeply familiar. Every sound was gentle. Every movement left ripples that glowed faintly before fading away. He could feel echoes of moments passing through him, days of silent missions, glimpses of the boys laughing in the backyard, the hum of Doofenshmirtz's inventions sputtering out. They were fragments, drifting like leaves on a calm stream. And then he saw it, a faint outline in the distance, barely visible through the mist. A shape moving slowly, calmly, with purpose. It was him. Or rather, a version of him walking forward, carrying no gadgets, no code, no disguise, just a calm expression and open eyes, as if he was finally seeing the world without the weight of duty. The dream felt like an invitation, not a memory. He followed step after quiet step until the reflection turned toward him. The two figures met in the center of that shimmering water, and for a long time they simply stood there, mirror images, perfectly still. Then, without a sound, the reflection smiled. A ripple spread outward. The scene began to fade. When Perry opened his eyes, morning light had just begun to filter through the blinds. He didn't move right away. The dream clung to him like fog, strange, peaceful, and weightless. He didn't quite understand it, but he felt its meaning settle somewhere deep inside. A quiet message that maybe even rest had its purpose. He stretched slightly, blinked once, and turned his gaze toward the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, there was no urgency in his movements, no rush to disappear into the day. Outside, the city was waking up again, still gentle, still balanced. It was learning, he thought, to breathe on its own. The sun rose slowly that morning, its first rays cutting through a pale haze that hung over the rooftops. Dew clung to the grass, glittering faintly like 1,000 tiny mirrors. It was a new day, ordinary in every sense, yet touched by something unseen. Phineas leaned on the backyard railing, staring at the quiet yard. "It feels peaceful today," he said softly. Ferb nodded in silent agreement, his eyes drawn to the small patch of shade beneath the treehouse. The trap door was still closed. Neither of them said Perry's name, but both were thinking of him. They had grown used to his quiet comings and goings, the gentle taps on the floor, the small, knowing look he'd give before disappearing. But now that he was simply there, resting without mission or mystery, the house felt different in a way that was almost soothing. Maybe it was okay for the world to slow down. Downtown, Heinz Doofenshmirtz stood at his lab window again, mug in hand, watching the city. His latest invention sat unfinished beside him, its blueprint curling at the edges. He'd lost motivation halfway through and found himself instead tracing shapes in the condensation on the glass. "Oh, he murmured, it's strange not having to worry about being foiled." The thought didn't come with bitterness, only quiet curiosity. He looked out toward the horizon, where the first light was touching the tallest buildings, and felt something gentle settle in his chest. "Maybe he's resting," he said, smiling faintly. "And maybe I should too." He turned away from the window and shut off the lab lights. The soft hum of machinery faded, replaced by a stillness that wasn't empty, it was peaceful. For once, the city didn't need villains or heroes. It just needed the quiet. As the morning deepened, the city carried on with its calm rhythm. The fountains flowed again, perfectly timed. The park gates stood open for families and friends. Small acts of kindness seemed to ripple naturally now, a shared smile, a helping hand, an unspoken patience that passed between strangers like sunlight through clouds. The city had learned something from its silent guardian, that peace isn't just the absence of chaos, but the quiet choice to care. And beneath that calm, in a small room tucked away from the world, Perry stirred. His eyes opened slowly, blinking in the golden light spilling through the blinds. He rose, stretched, and placed his hat gently back on his head. He paused for a moment, listening to the sounds of morning birds calling softly, the faint clatter of breakfast dishes upstairs, the hum of life returning to motion. Then he looked toward the door. There was no alarm, no urgent message waiting, no call to action. Just the soft certainty that the city was fine, at least for now. He smiled, small but real, and began his quiet walk to the surface. When he reached the backyard, the boys were still talking, their laughter spilling through the air like music. Perry sat near them, silent as always, content to simply be. The morning breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it a sense of balance restored. The world didn't feel empty anymore, just calm. Maybe that was what being a hero truly meant. Not the missions, not the secrecy, but the quiet understanding that sometimes the best thing you can do for the world is to let it breathe. The light caught on the edge of his hat as he tilted it slightly, almost like a farewell to the stillness that had taught him something new. And as the city continued its gentle rhythm, Perry sat in the sun awake, peaceful, and perfectly at home. S6, dreamed of the unwritten life. Morning light moved gently across the room, tracing the curve of the walls and the quiet shape resting beneath the window. Perry sat near the sill, eyes half open, watching as the first glow of gold slipped between the curtains. The world was silent except for the hum of waking life distant birds, the faint creak of a floorboard upstairs, the whisper of wind through leaves. It was one of those rare mornings that didn't ask for anything. No alerts, no missions, no rush, just stillness wide and endless, like a pond untouched by wind. He tilted his head slightly as though listening to something only he could hear. But there was no signal this time, no secret code in the background hum, only the quiet. And in that quiet, thoughts began to wander. What would life be, he wondered, without the duty, without the constant rhythm of secret paths and coded calls? Would the world still hold meaning if it were only this calm mornings and soft sunlight, the quiet company of those who never asked for explanations? He had never allowed himself to imagine that question before. But now, in this fragile stillness, it felt safe to. He stepped outside. The grass was cool beneath his feet, wet from the dawn's dew. Phineas and Ferb were still asleep. The treehouse above him stood silent, its wooden planks glowing faintly under the early light. Everything smelled of fresh air and earth clean, grounded, alive. Perry walked slowly toward the fence where a small patch of flowers had begun to bloom, wild and untamed. Their petals swayed gently in the wind, carrying hints of color that felt almost new to him. He watched a butterfly land softly on one of the blooms. It stayed still for a long time, wings trembling slightly in the morning air, then lifted off again, aimless, unhurried, free. There's something beautiful in that. He sat in the shade, resting his back against the tree trunk. The world was wide and slow. A few clouds drifted lazily across the sky, their edges glowing with pale sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed. A sprinkler clicked to life. It was such an ordinary morning, and yet it felt like a gift. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the world settle around him. There was no need to move, no reason to plan, no mission waiting beyond the quiet. The peace that had once felt strange, now felt natural like this, was what the world had always been meant to be. And in that moment of stillness, a thought formed soft as the morning breeze. Maybe the best version of life isn't written in missions or duty. Maybe it lives in the moments between, in the quiet glances, The warm mornings, the gentle heartbeat of a world that keeps turning, even when you stop to rest. He opened his eyes again. The light had grown brighter now, catching on the edge of his hat. Somewhere inside the house, a kettle whistled faintly. The day was beginning. But he didn't move yet. He wanted to remember the feeling of stillness, of simply existing without purpose, without role, just being part of the calm. For the first time, the unwritten part of his life didn't feel empty. It felt possible. The day unfolded quietly with a softness that felt almost fragile. Sunlight spilled through the windows in long, calm streaks, catching in the dust that floated lazily through the air. Phineas and Ferb were at the kitchen table, their heads bent close over a half-drawn blueprint. It wasn't for anything grand this time, just a small glider made from scrap wood and fabric. Something simple. Perry watched from the corner as the boys chatted in soft bursts of excitement. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but their laughter carried across the room like music. It was gentle, unforced, the kind of joy that didn't need to be earned. He felt a quiet warmth rise in his chest. This, he thought, was what the world looked like when it didn't need saving. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Perry found himself wandering through the neighborhood. He walked without a map, without direction, letting the path choose itself. The sidewalks were alive with the soft rhythm of daily life. A paperboy coasting by on his bike, a gardener humming to himself, a cat stretching in the sun. No one paid him much attention. He was just a quiet creature passing through, blending into the calm. But he noticed everything, the way light shimmered off car roofs, the faint laughter spilling from open windows, the easy rhythm of a world content in its simplicity. He realized, almost with surprise, that peace had its own kind of motion. It wasn't stillness. It was flow, a gentle current of life that carried everyone forward without hurry. He stopped near the park. Children ran through the grass, chasing bubbles that sparkled in the air before bursting. A small pond mirrored the blue of the sky. Ducks drifted near the edge, their reflections rippling softly with each movement. Perry sat on a bench and watched quietly, blending into the background like a shadow of calm. The world was busy, yet peaceful, a harmony that didn't depend on him. And that, he realized, was the beauty of it. The city didn't need a hero when it remembered how to be kind on its own. He watched a father kneel to tie his daughter's shoe, smiling as she giggled. A woman nearby offered her umbrella to a stranger as a brief shower passed over. These were tiny gestures, invisible in the grand scheme, yet somehow more powerful than any mission he'd ever completed. When the rain ended, the air smelled clean, fresh pavement, wet leaves, and the faint scent of flowers carried on the wind. Perry tilted his head upward, letting a few raindrops slide down his fur before they vanished into the warm sunlight, returning through the clouds. It felt like the world was breathing again, slow and steady. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting that rhythm settle inside him. He'd spent years living between two worlds, one ordinary, one secret. But maybe they weren't so separate after all. Maybe the hero he'd always been was born not from the missions, but from the quiet choice to care in every world he touched. The thought lingered like a faint melody, soft and complete. Evening began its slow descent over the city, tinting everything in shades of amber and violet. Long shadows stretched across rooftops and fences, weaving quiet lines between light and dark. The hum of the day softened conversations fading, footsteps slowing, the soft rhythm of a world winding down. Perry sat by the window again, the same place where morning had found him. Outside, the street lamps flickered on one by one. Their glow reflected faintly in his eyes. The house was peaceful. Phineas and Ferb were upstairs now, still awake, talking in hushed excitement about something they'd build tomorrow. He listened to the faint sound of their voices, the kind of warmth that filled spaces without trying. It reminded him how different life could be when he allowed himself to simply exist inside it, not as an agent, not as a secret, but as part of the small, steady rhythm of home. He had always thought stillness meant stopping, that it was something separate from purpose. But now, as the light faded, he began to see that stillness had its own kind of weight, not heavy, but grounding. It was the quiet truth that life could hold meaning even when it wasn't rushing toward something. He glanced toward the small shelf by the corner of the room. On it sat a few small mementos. A toy the boys had built, a photo they'd once taken, and his agent's hat, perfectly placed, untouched since the morning. The sight brought a faint warmth to his heart. The hat had been part of him for so long, a symbol of action, of identity, of every hidden thing he'd ever done. But tonight it simply looked like a memory, resting peacefully. He wondered what life would be if that part of him never returned, if the missions remained quiet, if the alarms never called again. Would the world still move? Would it still hold him gently within it? The answer came softly, carried by the sound of crickets through the window. Yes. The world would continue, and so would he, not as a hero, not as a secret, but as something simpler, someone who could sit in silence and still belong. As the sky deepened to blue, Perry closed his eyes. His breathing fell into rhythm with the sounds around him, the distant hum of cars, the soft ticking of the clock, the quiet heartbeats of a home that didn't need saving. Stillness wasn't the absence of life. It was life, seen clearly for what it was. Steady, patient, full of quiet love. And for the first time, that was enough. The night settled gently over the house, deep and blue. Moonlight poured across the floor like liquid silver, touching the edges of furniture, the soft outline of the window and the still shape resting beneath it. The world had gone silent again. Not empty, but calm, breathing in quiet rhythm with the stars. Perry sat awake for a while, eyes half open, watching the faint patterns of clouds drift across the moon. He wasn't thinking of missions or memories now. His mind was somewhere softer in the small spaces between thought, where life simply existed without needing to be understood. He remembered the dream he'd had a few nights ago, that shimmering world of water and reflection, where he'd seen another version of himself walking freely beneath a boundless sky. Back then, it had felt distant, unreachable. But now, sitting in the gentle dark, he realized he was already living it, the unwritten life he once thought he couldn't have. A life not bound by roles or titles, but by quiet presence. From upstairs came a faint sound, laughter, half asleep and fading. The boys were still awake, whispering stories to each other beneath the covers. Their voices were like the last notes of a song, soft and familiar, blending with the hum of crickets outside. He smiled. He didn't need to be part of the conversation to feel connected to it. The bond was quieter than words, stronger than duty. It was what had grounded him all along, the unseen thread between who he was and the world he protected. Maybe that was the dream all along. Not to escape the noise, but to find peace within it. He stood and crossed the room, moving with unhurried grace. The floorboards creaked softly under his steps. He placed his hat back on the shelf, not as a farewell, but as a promise. The night didn't need an ending. It only needed rest. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of the garden through the open window grass, soil and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. Perry closed his eyes, letting the air brush gently against him. The world was still turning, still dreaming, and for the first time, he felt it wasn't asking him for anything. It was just inviting him to stay. He lay down near the window, curling quietly into the soft glow of moonlight. His eyes grew heavy, his breathing slow. Somewhere between waking and sleep, he felt that same reflection from his dream sit beside him, the quiet version of himself, free and whole. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. As the stars drifted above, the two became one again. The secret life, the ordinary life, and the dream in between, all blending softly into rest. The city beyond stayed calm. The night stayed kind. And in a world that no longer needed saving, its quietest guardian slept finally, peacefully, at home. And so the quiet night drifts to a close. Perry's story reminds us that even the most extraordinary lives are built on ordinary moments, small acts of care, stillness, and the comfort of belonging. Sometimes the greatest adventures end not with action, but with peace. As the moonlight fades and the world rests, we leave Perry where he's happiest not saving the city, but simply being part of it. Thank you for joining this calm journey through his untold nights. May your dreams be gentle, your thoughts light, and your heart at ease. Good night.